Highest profile position in the NFL, quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, and Kalen Kaler went back and spoke to 17 different signal callers, this very exclusive fraternity. Let's just start with the most recent. What did Tony Romo have to say about Dak Prescott?
Yeah, so Tony obviously said, he's very positive about Dak. He says Dak has a bright future ahead of him. And I think the question that I wish I would have asked Romo that I didn't ask him would be, what do you think of the sophomore slump theory about Dak Prescott? Because that's sort of the main, media line out there about Dak. And I got a chance to speak to Wade Wilson, who is Prescott's quarterback coach, and he said, he doesn't buy into the sophomore slump theory, of course, because he's his coach, but because, Dak is now in his second year, he's had all this more experience to learn more. I mean, last year, he didn't even have the offseason. He didn't have the OTAs. He barely had reps in training camp. He was third on that depth chart for most of his offseason. So when you think about it, he's had all this more time with the first team this year. So Wade Wilson has a little bit of a point there that, he has learned so much more, so there really might not be a sophomore slump for Dak.
And it's so different than Romo's own career because he sat behind Vinny Testaverde and then he sat behind Drew Bledsoe. I mean, did he talk about how that start to his career impacted him versus how Dak was really thrown into the fire?
Yeah, he actually had a really good comment about Dak where he said, if he would have had a few more years to learn behind himself, to learn behind Romo, he would have been better off for it. He probably could have learned a lot more from Romo had he had a couple more seasons to pick his brain, because Romo is an amazing football mind. You sit down and ask him one question about the mechanics of throwing a football, and he'll go on for 4 to 5 minutes with an answer without taking a breath. And you're like, oh my goodness, you have so much information.
Yeah, well, we're expecting a lot from him in the broadcast booth. But just going to for a second, what did Dak say that Romo did impart on him? They obviously didn't have a lot of time together. It was a little awkward because we all knew that Tony would be out on the field playing if he was physically healthy and could. But how was the relationship?
Yeah, Dak had a really interesting specific story. He took us back to week 16. They were playing the Lions. The Cowboys had scored on 2 drives to start the game. And Tony kind of took Dak aside on the sideline and he said, hey, look, if you score on 1 drive, just the opening drive, the defensive coordinator is usually going to stick to their game plan. If you just score on 2, though, they are totally upheaving everything they have. So Dak said that was something that years from now, 5, 10 years from now in his career, he's going to look back if he's in the same situation and think of Tony Romo.
Yeah, 5, 10 years from now, if he's still the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, there's probably a pretty good chance he's also going to go to the broadcast booth, because it seems like that is the path for a lot of the Dallas QBs. What makes you think that Romo is going to be any good at this?
Yeah, so as I said before, he's just has this great football mind where he's able to explain really technical things without boring you, without your eyes kind of glazing over. And he's done 8 practice games so far. He's done 5, on the monitor in a studio of past games, and he's done 3 live game situations, in Canton. I was in Canton, I didn't even know that Romo was there. They had set up this little outpost beyond the end zone, and Jim Nantz and Romo were in there, practice calling this preseason game. So he's had 3 practice live games, and we'll see week 1. That'll be his first real game live broadcast action.
Wow, very stealth how they were able to sneak under everyone's radar.
Right.
Of course, replacing a legendary Cowboy quarterback can be very difficult. For Quincy Carter, coming in after Troy Aikman had won 3 Super Bowls, how did he find his experience?
Yeah, I really had an interesting conversation with Quincy. At the time he came in, he'd been struggling with marijuana use and sort of an addiction to that since he was a mid-teenager. So that had been going on for a few years in his life, and he just wasn't ready for that kind of pressure and that kind of national attention. He had played at Georgia, which is a big-time program, so he'd had the media experience there, but he told me that he just was not ready to admit to his addiction, wasn't ready to get help for that. And because he was struggling off the field with that, he kind of closed himself off and only let a few teammates in his circle. And he said that really made him struggle as a leader and to earn the team's trust. And Jerry Jones, actually, he said that Jerry was really trying to help him and got him some counselors, got him some therapists to talk to. But as I said, Quincy just told me he wasn't ready at the time to admit that he had a problem. He was 22. He doesn't want to admit that to himself or especially to his boss.
Yeah.
So it wasn't successful there.
What about now for Quincy?
Yeah, now he's currently in a rehab sober living facility in Santa Monica, California. And this is probably, I think, his at least second or third bout of rehab. So he was really like open about his situation and totally understands where he's gone wrong in his career, but so far hasn't been able to actually get to the other side and get out of that rehab facility and find success. But he did say he wants to get into coaching when he does get out. So that's a future goal of his, is to help guys not make the same mistakes that he's been making.
That's always interesting to see the divergent paths for people who have that role as being the most famous players in the NFL, without a doubt. Obviously, being a Dallas Cowboys quarterback before the age of social media probably has some of its advantages. What were some of the stories that you heard from the older quarterbacks about things going on in Dallas?
Yeah, so Staubach had some great stories, especially about Tom Landry, who we all know was a very unamused guy. He didn't laugh a lot and was very serious. So one day at practice, Landry liked to actually get into the play and show how he wanted things to be done. And he took Staubach out of the play and demonstrated a handoff to a running back. And apparently he had a limp, on his right knee had some problems. So when Staubach got back into the play, he did it exactly the way that Landry did and limped to the running back. And everybody laughed, he said, except for Coach Landry.
Yeah, did he get benched that week?
Yeah, right? That's a great question.
Probably not, considering Staubach was so prolific as a Dallas Cowboys quarterback. Fantastic stories. You talked to almost every Dallas Cowboys quarterback since the franchise became a thing. Great job, and thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, the first week of college football is upon us with some very intriguing Week 1 matchups on the schedule. Here to give us 5 things to watch for this weekend is SI.com's Pete Mundo. And Pete, the showcase game on the weekend is number 1 Alabama, number 3 Florida State. What are we watching for in this ballgame?
How bad does the loser get beat? Because whoever loses this game is still very much in the college football playoff discussion. It's 1 versus 3. Unless you have a 30-plus point blowout, there should be no blowback for whoever loses this. Now, I really believe it's going to be Florida State that comes up short. Alabama, under Nick Saban, the last 10 season openers, they've won by an average of nearly 30 points. They're 5-0 in season openers against top 25 teams, 3-0 against top 10 teams. So Nick Saban, if there's any kind of critique against him, is that his guys kind of get worn out by the end of the season, but there's never a team or a coach that is more prepared in Week 1 than the Crimson Tide and Nick Saban.
What about individual players? Who should we be looking out for?
Will Greer, he led Florida 2 years ago to 6-0 as the starting quarterback. Then he got suspended for taking an over-the-counter supplement. He transfers to West Virginia. He's good to go. Week 1, they're playing Virginia Tech, a top 25 matchup Sunday night, when there's only really 2 primetime matchups there. UCLA and Texas A&M is the other game on the schedule Sunday night. So that guy right there, who not a lot of people are talking about, is somebody that I believe is going to be in the conversation as one of the best quarterbacks, not just in his conference, the Big 12, but also the entire country. He kind of gets forgotten, but I really feel like with that offense, really good running game for Dana Holgorsen, kind of a spread power run attack, he's going to be a household name by the end of this season, if he's not already.
How about coaches on the hot seat? Is Week 1 critical for 1 or 2 coaches around the country?
Kevin Sumlin at Texas A&M, along with Jim Moore at UCLA, 2 guys that are on that proverbial hot seat. They play each other in Week 1. Whoever loses that game, the other fan base, that fan base is going to be really upset. So that's kind of how this is going to play out. Those 2 guys, whoever wins that game has a little bit of wiggle room. Not a ton because it's still a non-conference game, but at least gets you off on the right foot. You're feeling good about where your season is going. So it doesn't mean much for the conference standings or really anything, but in terms of the direction these 2 programs are taking and what the future of these head coaches are, that game on Sunday means a ton.
Finally, Tom Herman, he's making his debut head coach of the Texas Longhorns. What do you expect from Herman in his new job?
Well, it's so funny because even Tom Herman said late last week, he goes, I don't know how we're in the top 25. I don't know why we're ranked. I think it's to keep his guys humble. He has a lot of talent, but he also knows, I've got issues at running back. Shane Buechele's coming back at quarterback. I like him. Do I love him? I really don't know. They're playing Maryland in Week 1. They're a 3-score favorite. if they don't go out there and roll through it.
My old school, no good.
Well, no, football's not their specialty. So.
Hey, they were good when I was there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a coincidence.
I don't want to age you, but that's just a game. They got to come out of the gates really hot. They play USC in a couple weeks, a big matchup on the road. So if you really want to feel like this Texas team is back, and we've heard that before, last year they beat Notre Dame in the opener, and Texas is back, head coach gets fired.
A lot to watch for in week one. We gave you an appetizer, a little handful to get you started going into the weekend. Pete Mundo, thanks, man.
Anytime, guys.
Lots of soccer to discuss on this 1st of September Friday, and who better to talk to than SI senior writer Grant Will. Grant, welcome to the show. You're writing a book right now. It's called Masters of Modern Soccer, How the World's Best Play the 21st Century Game. And we're going to get to that in a bit. But let's start with World Cup qualifying. There's an enormous match at Red Bull Arena between the U.S. and Costa Rica that many are considering do or die for the Americans. How big is this game, and what keys will decide it?
Well, it's a huge game for the U.S., which really got behind the 8 ball by losing its first 2 games of the Hex last November. But ever since then, they've been very steady under Bruce Arena after he's come in. And this is close to a must-win game for the U.S. still, just to make up that difference from losing the first 2 games. But they're in decent shape, I think, to qualify for the World Cup at this point. I don't think there's a ton of worries out there, but you still got to back that up by getting 3 points against a Costa Rica team that beat this U.S. team 4-0 last November and led to Jurgen Klinsmann being fired.
So this is the biggest match for Bruce Arena since his return. And you've spent some time with the team this week. Have you noticed anything different in training or maybe in match situations that they're going to help them for this game?
There's a real consistency, actually, around this team now in the sense that they know what to expect when the players come in on a Monday with 2 big World Cup qualifiers coming up. There's no lack of communication between Arena and his staff and the players. And the players seem to enjoy coming into the national team in a way that they weren't in the final days of Klinsmann's reign. And I think it's just that consistency. There are no surprises for anybody involved with this team right now. And I think that's led in part to this U.S. resurgence where there's just a really good vibe around the team.
All right, let's talk about Boy Wonder. Let's talk about Christian Pulisic, who really is the man of the hour. And in my opinion, he's not only a star for the U.S., he's a star in the world of soccer, right? So, but against Mexico earlier this, in June, he had a little trouble with El Tri. They contained him pretty well. What do you think he has to do to move to the next level?
Well, I think here's a guy who says that he's really excited about what he's doing at Dortmund and with the U.S. team. He told me, actually, that he feels like more responsibility when he plays for the U.S., that they're asking more out of him than even Dortmund is, where he's still a bit of a complimentary player with a bigger role this year. But he's not going to be a superstar every game. We saw that in the game at Mexico, where they bottled him up pretty good. But if you look at the last 11 U.S. goals, Pulisic has been involved in 9 of them, whether through assists, goals, or setting them up by earning free kicks. So he's the U.S.'s best player at the age of 18, and we're in a World Cup year right now. So we have enough of a sample size of seeing Christian Pulisic to know that this guy's the real thing.
Yeah, his rise just keeps heading up. Mexico, meanwhile, lead the group. They haven't lost a match. They've only conceded 2 goals. And to be honest, it's quite a great contrast from the last campaign and also for Juan Carlos Osorio, who has basically said, thank God the summer is over at the losses of the Confederations Cup and the Gold Cup. What do you think of Mexico heading to Russia, their chances of success over there?
Frankly, I'm amazed that Juan Carlos Osorio's job is in any questioning or in any danger down in Mexico. It should not be, though their media certainly makes it seem like that's the case. All that matters is the World Cup. In the big picture, Confederations Cup doesn't mean a heck of a lot. A B-Team Gold Cup certainly doesn't mean a heck of a lot. The World Cup matters. And Juan Carlos Osorio has them playing very good soccer in World Cup qualifying. They're not in the situation they were in 4 years ago, like you said, where they nearly missed out on the World Cup through qualifying. I'm very impressed with Osorio, and more to the point, his players are very impressed with him. Even with all these rotations that he does with the Mexican lineup, the players have been unwavering in their support of Osorio publicly.
That's great. I mean, this has also been a big week for transfers. I mean, the end of the transfer deadline happened recently with Kylian Mbappe going to PSG on loan with an option to buy next summer, which is obviously the biggest piece of news, but also Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain going to Liverpool from Arsenal. What are the biggest stories, and who are the winners and who are the losers from this time?
When I look at winners, it's hard not to say PSG when you look at the window. They got Neymar, they got Kylian Mbappe. Now, my question is, how is this going to work with UEFA's financial fair play rules, which I don't think are clearly very strong because they're supposed to be based on you can only spend just a bit more than what you get revenue-wise. And PSG certainly looks like they're spending far more than they're earning revenue-wise for these guys. But look, they got Neymar, they got Mbappe. They're going to be a real force, I think, this year on the Champions League stage. Losers, hard not to say Arsenal. You know, you look at what happened here. Their star player, Alexis Sanchez, is really unhappy now that he's staying at Arsenal. He wanted to go to Manchester City. And then Thomas Lemar, who Arsenal puts in a bid for, huge bid, nearly $100 million with Monaco. They forgot to check with Lemar, who doesn't want to play for Arsenal. And in this business, it comes down to, does the player want to play for you? And it makes Arsenal look really naive not to at least find out from his agent whether Lemar wanted to play for them. Because if they couldn't get Lemar, they weren't going to move Sanchez. And the way things are going on the field right now, just Arsenal is in a real mess.
Lemar scoring 2 goals for France as well. You know, his stature growing and growing. Okay, so now we have the end of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar Barcelona, and now it's the introduction of Mbappe, Cavani, and Neymar. Do you think that PSG can challenge for the title, for the Champions League?
I think they can. I think it's, you know, a little bit naive to assume that suddenly these guys are going to get thrown in there and they're just going to be world beaters instantly. They're going to need to develop some chemistry, but they're good players. I think they can do that. I have a little bit of a question on, you know, where is Mbappe going to play? He's not really a winger. And so, you know, Neymar you would think would be center forward, or Cavani center forward. Neymar out wide, do you play 3, you know, a front 3, or what are you going to do there? And where does Angel Di Maria fit into all of this? He could still move to a place in Spain today because their transfer deadline is tonight. But there's a lot going on there. You know, PSG is a weird team. Like, what they do in the French league isn't really going to make waves with anybody because everyone assumes they're going to win it big this year. But for them, the standard is Champions League. Can they win a Champions League? They're certainly capable of it talent-wise.
And to me, a big loss was Matuidi. You know, leaving that team, I think an anchor in the midfield
really
is a
player.
big loss. Yes, absolutely. My favorite, by the way, being Renato Sanchez going to Swansea on loan from Bayern Munich. What do you think about that one?
I'm trying to imagine Renato Sanchez hanging out in Swansea. This is an interesting move, and the reason it happened is because Sanchez has not been playing at Bayern Munich under Carlo Ancelotti, but his former Bayern assistant, Paul Clement, is the coach at Swansea. And so they worked out a deal here where you know, Sanchez showed a lot at the Euro, hasn't really shown much at all. Hasn't had the chance to for Bayern. And so there's people starting to question, how good is this guy? Well, we'll find out how good he is because he's going to get a lot of opportunities to play in the Premier League this year. But it's pretty amazing when you see like some of the most coveted players in the world, you know, prospect-wise, playing for, you know, mid to lower level Premier League teams just because there's so much money in the Premier League these days.
It's definitely going to be a great thing to see. Let's talk about your book, which is Masters of Modern Soccer, How the World's Best Play the 21st Century Game. It sounds amazing and super interesting. Tell us about it.
Well, I have learned a lot about the sport of soccer over the last 2 years doing interviews for this book. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at the craft of soccer position by position. So I picked one player for each position who's world-class or close to it, but also really intelligent at explaining how they do their job, what's in their minds when you see what they do on the field. So my goalkeeper is Manuel Neuer, my defender is Vincent Kompany, the defensive midfielder is Xabi Alonso, the attacking midfielder is Christian Pulisic, the forward is Chicharito Hernandez.
This is the greatest five-a-side team ever.
The manager is Roberto Martinez, and the director of football is Michael Zorc at Borussia Dortmund, who just sold Ousmane Dembele, you know, who he bought for 15 million euros last year for 105 million euros to Barcelona.
Who's kind of like the Billy Bean of soccer, right?
He is. I mean, he's a really interesting guy who has been able to use the fact that Dortmund doesn't have revenues of the biggest clubs, but still be able to compete with those clubs, get to the quarterfinals of Champions League, compete to win the Bundesliga, even though they have far less revenues than Bayern Munich.
That's incredible. And when can we expect this book to come out?
So it comes out May 1st. It's going to come out a month ahead of the World Cup because 5 of the 7 guys are going to be participating in that World Cup. And then it's available on pre-order now on Amazon, other bookseller type places. So I think the U.S. is ready for a book that gets into details of what happens on the field in soccer. And I learned a ton talking to these guys over the last 2 years. I hope that comes through on the page.
Well, I, for one, can't wait to read it. Grant Wahl, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Have a great, great day.
Backstage politics are almost an industry of themselves, at least the rumors about them when it comes to the pro wrestling circuit, whether it's Triple H, if he's leaning one way, or John Cena maybe having some sway. How much of that stuff is actually true and how much of it is complete innuendo?
There is little, like you said, sway here, but the be-all, end-all ends and begins with Vince McMahon. That's it. There is no, this guy, Triple H says this, or John Cena says this, and it's all Vince. I would love Vince to write a book, but I don't think he ever will. He is he knows so much, but doesn't really like talking about himself. So if Vince doesn't want to talk about himself, I'll talk about him.
Knowing Vince and knowing the audience the way you do, who would you peg as the next crossover star in pro wrestling?
Well, that's, it's not always up to Vince. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's funny because Cena right now is going to, the crossover to the top, right? Leading man in movies. Batista's done amazing for himself. But if you look at somebody who does more, it could be me as far as doing the most.
Yeah.
This will probably be the 4th New York Times bestseller. Fozzie's got a #1 hit on Sirius right now. Wrestling-wise, we've talked about that. Talk is Jericho, one of the top 20 podcasts in the entire world in any genre. So, I think for me, I constantly push myself into, once again, not putting myself into a box, not listening if somebody says I can't do it. If I know, if I wanted to try out to be the center of the Rangers next year, it's not going to happen. But if it means, can you do a 5th book? Absolutely. I'll think of something. So I think the most important thing about WWE is if you work there and you have talent, it's show business boot camp. You learn a little bit about everything. And if you can take those lessons you learn there, you can go and do anything in entertainment and be at the top level of it.
Speaking of trying something new, Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather this weekend. You've actually been in the ring with Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah.
Would you like to see Conor McGregor in the WWE?
Well, here's a funny thing, and this just shows how much stuff, it's not just me, but for a lot of us. I went online because I did Larry King with Floyd, and I wanted to just watch it. That's when I saw the pictures of being in the ring with him. I totally had forgotten.
Yeah.
And it was 8 years to the day of me and Floyd. I call it, little man, I'll knock you out, and just face to face. How could you forget that? But I sent the picture to Vince. I said, Vince, why didn't you promote Mayweather versus Jericho? We could have made $700 million. But I think Conor's very smart, and that was a great fight with the perfect finish for it. You knew Floyd would win, but Conor did a great job. And it ended the way it should have. He needed to call it off. But Conor comes out of it looking like $100 million. Floyd retires at 50-0. So will Conor McGregor end up in the WWE? I think it's a no-brainer. It might not be this year or the year after that because there's a lot of money that you got to spend to get him in there. But a guy that yappy and knows the concept of cutting a wrestling promo, same with Floyd. That's why Floyd did WWE, because he got a lot of his stuff from WWE ideas. So I think Conor will definitely end up there. It's just a matter of when he wants to. I also think Ronda Rousey will eventually end up there one way or another as well.
A guy who's been in both, Brock Lesnar. You had a little bit of a confrontation with him a year ago, SummerSlam. He won the Fatal 4-Way this past SummerSlam. How would you describe his wrestling career overall?
Oh, one of the greatest of all time. Just a legitimate genetic freak and a presence, very intimidating presence. He is one of those old school, doesn't say much beasts that will draw money until he's 65 years old. Because when he walks by, it's legitimately scary. It's like the Mountain from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
You're scared of this guy. And you don't want to get in his bad side unless you're stupid Jericho and you challenge him to a fight, but that's another story. But yeah, definitely worth every penny that Vince pays him, and he pays him a lot. And Brock is smart too. He plays it. Now he's talking about going back to UFC, who could also use him. That's another breakout mainstream star in a different way. You know what I mean? Like, everyone knows the name Brock Lesnar because of what he has done. The only guy I think that was a WWE world champion heavyweight and UFC as well. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of break out in that mainstream area. I think The Rock will probably end up being the president of the United States one of these days. You know, we're in that world now where it's celebrity presidents are in vogue. Yeah. You don't have to have any experience. You just have to be able to talk and have some charisma. You know, and I think he'll probably end up as the president. So I think there's going to be a lot of people that worked in the WWE that will take over even more so all aspects of show business.
You mentioned how good you were on the mic to be able to go against The Rock. Is there a catchphrase you wish you had thought of?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, you know, the easiest one ever, yes, what, to the point where this past year I just wanted to see if I could get the word it over. Like it was just like a game for me, and yeah. I got it over. Catchphrase-wise, though, like I said, yeah, the you know, if you smell what The Rock is cooking, the classics, you know, Austin 316. I think probably Austin 316 because that was the most spot T-shirt of all time was Austin 316. I think still to this day. So it's funny because you're thinking of catchphrases, and I've had a lot of them over the years, but you never know what's gonna stick. You know, like the list. Like I never expected the list was going to do anything. So you just don't know what's going to stick with the audience. But when something works, you just go with it.
Speaking of the list, you have Jericho's list. Is there anybody in the sports world you want to put on it?
You know, it's funny because every signing that I do, book signing, 50% of the people, can you put me on the list? Can you put me on the list? You can't just put somebody on the list. It doesn't work that way. I think the best one was Tom Brady when he won the Super Bowl this year. And people were calling him the GOAT, which is my nickname in wrestling. And I actually put Tom Brady on the list. And it was super hilarious because I think we were up in that area. But it's just so funny. Like, you know what happens? You know what happens when you call yourself the GOAT, but you're not really the GOAT? Tom Brady, you just made the list. And it's like, it went like viral, you know, like Jericho putting Tom Brady on the list. So, I mean, it's funny to have this list. It's become much bigger than Chris Jericho. If I decided to stop wrestling but still wanted to make really easy wrestling payoffs, I could just go put the list on a stool in the middle of the ring and just walk away, and people would cheer and clap. They'd rather see that than me anyways at this point.
Well, hopefully the new book winds up on the bestseller list.
On the list, the bestseller list, yeah.
Four-letter word. Chris Jericho, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
It's time for SI Now's Weekend Drive presented by Toyota. Let's go places. The U.S. Open is underway in Flushing, Queens. Reigning Wimbledon champ Garbiñe Muguruza is looking to capture her second major of the year. Preparing for the third round, the Spaniard is excited she's been able to advance this far.
Contenta de estar en la tercera ronda porque obviamente, como ya he dicho antes, los últimos años siempre me he quedado en esa ronda y por fin este año, pues, bueno, he hecho algo mejor seguramente y he ganado.
Muguruza will take on Magdalena Ribarikova. In round 3, the two have met 4 times with the series tied at 2 matches apiece. Next, we'll preview some college football action. Texas A&M will square off against UCLA in the Rose Bowl. Aggies wide receiver Christian Kirk, an Arizona native, is excited to play in the Rose Bowl and its legendary atmosphere.
I'm just ready to get there. I went to the Rose Bowl once, and it's exciting place. You can just feel all the history and tradition that's been, you know, within the stadium, and you know, just to be able to get the opportunity to go in there and play a game, a big-time game on Sunday, you know, against UCLA is an exciting opportunity.
The Bruins are looking to rebound from last year's overtime loss to the Aggies at Kyle Field. We end with the most anticipated matchup of the season. Number 1 Alabama facing number 3 Florida State. This is the first time in history that 2 top 3 preseason ranked teams will face each other opening weekend. Seminoles head coach Jimbo Fisher knows this game will be physical, but likes how his team will stack up against the Tide.
They're strong, they're physical. They play the game and on both sides. And, you know, I think the way they're constructed, that's the way Nick likes to construct his team. And I think that's the comment he was making about in the preseason, that we're constructed like when he said the SEC team and everybody, but you know, we try to construct ourselves in very similar ways. That we have big physical guys that can 2-gap or 1-gap and let backers flow. Or up front, you got to be able to block, and you still got to run the football and be able to defend the run.
Fisher and Saban are the only 2 active head coaches with winning records against top 25 teams. Neither head coach has lost an opener in their current job, and something